What if I told you that some of the world's most delicious fruits that could change the way you think about flavor, have been fully banned from America for over 70 years? Some were banned to protect agriculture, others because one bite of the wrong one could kill you. And one was banned because an entire industry didn't want you to know it existed. 20 fruits that the rest of the world enjoys freely were declared forbidden in America after 1950, and the reasons why will shock you. Get ready, because number 5 was called the Queen of Fruits, and Americans couldn't taste it for over 50 years. Number 20. Barberry Fruit. Barberries were banned across much of America starting in the 1950s because they served as an alternate host for wheat stem rust, a fungal disease that could devastate grain crops. The federal government launched an aggressive eradication campaign, making it illegal to grow, sell, or transport specific barberry varieties in wheat-growing regions. Homeowners were required to remove existing bushes, and agricultural agents would destroy any barberries they found. The berries themselves were prized for their intense tartness and high vitamin C content, perfect for jellies, sauces, and traditional Persian cooking. European immigrants had brought barberries to America and cultivated them successfully for generations. But the threat to wheat production was considered too great, and barberries were sacrificed to protect America's grain supply. The ban was so thorough that most Americans today have never seen or tasted these bright red, intensely sour berries that once grew in gardens across the country. Number 19. Elderberries. Elderberries weren't technically banned, but they became heavily restricted in the 1950s due to concerns about their safety when consumed raw. The bark, leaves, and seeds contain cyanogenic glycosides that can cause nausea, vomiting, and digestive upset. Several cases of children becoming ill after eating raw elderberries prompted widespread warnings from health departments and agricultural extension offices. The FDA never approved raw elderberries for certain commercial food uses, effectively limiting their presence in American markets. The irony is that properly cooked elderberries are not only safe, but incredibly nutritious, packed with antioxidants and immune-boosting compounds. But the 1950s culture of safety-first regulations and the rise of processed foods made this traditional fruit seem risky and unnecessary. Most commercial producers avoided them entirely, and elderberries disappeared from mainstream American cuisine, remembered only by foragers and traditional medicine practitioners. Number 18. Medlar. European medlars were restricted from import as plant material during the 1950s due to fears that European orchard pathogens could enter American agriculture. These medieval fruits require a unique ripening process called bletting, where they must be allowed to soften and partially decay before they're edible. The process takes weeks and results in a brown, mushy fruit that looks spoiled but tastes like spiced applesauce. Beyond the phytosanitary concerns, medlars faced cultural rejection in the 1950s America. The preference for fruits that looked perfect and could be eaten immediately meant that medlars, with their unusual appearance and lengthy preparation process, were seen as too much trouble. Import restrictions made it nearly impossible to obtain new varieties or plant stock, and the few existing American medlar trees were gradually removed as owners aged, and younger generations saw no value in maintaining them. Number 17. Fresh figs. Fresh figs from many countries were banned or heavily restricted in the 1950s due to fig mosaic virus, a pathogen that threatened American fig production in California and the South. The virus causes mottled leaves, reduced fruit quality, and eventual tree decline, and it spreads easily through infected plant material and certain insects. Imported fresh figs from Mediterranean and Middle Eastern countries were considered high risk, leading to strict import restrictions that effectively blocked most international fig trade. Domestic fresh figs remained available, but Americans lost access to dozens of exotic varieties that had never been cultivated in the United States. The restrictions lasted for decades and shaped American palates toward the limited fig varieties that could be grown domestically, making fresh figs a rare luxury rather than the common fruit they were in other parts of the world. Number 16. Loquat. Loquats from certain regions were banned in the 1950s because they can carry fire blight, a devastating bacterial disease that affects apples, pears, and other members of the rose family. Fire blight can destroy entire orchards in a single season, and the bacteria spread rapidly through rain, insects, and contaminated equipment. Import restrictions targeted loquats from countries where fire blight was endemic, effectively blocking fresh loquat imports from most of Asia and parts of Europe. The fruit itself is delicious, with a sweet, tart flavor reminiscent of peach and citrus, and it ripens in early spring when few other fresh fruits are available. But the threat to America's apple and pear industries was considered too serious to risk, and loquats remained effectively banned from import for decades, known only to Americans who grew them in their own yards or visited countries where they were common. Number 15. Starfruit. Starfruit, or carambola, was banned or heavily restricted from import in the 1950s and beyond due to its high risk of carrying invasive fruit flies, particularly the oriental fruit fly and Mediterranean fruit fly. These pests can devastate commercial fruit production, attacking everything from citrus to stone fruits to tropical varieties. The fruit's complex shape, with its distinctive ridges and crevices, made it especially difficult to inspect and treat, creating perfect hiding spots for fruit fly eggs and larvae. Import restrictions from Southeast Asia, where starfruit originated, were strictly enforced, and violations could result in the destruction of entire shipments. Americans didn't taste starfruit commonly until the 1980s and 1990s, when improved inspection technologies and irradiation treatments made limited imports possible. Even today, starfruit imports face more scrutiny than most other tropical fruits. Number 14. Sapodilla. Sapodilla was historically limited in import during the 1950s due to concerns about fruit fly infestations and seed borer pests that could establish themselves in American agriculture. This brown potato-like fruit has incredibly sweet flesh that tastes like brown sugar and pear, but its rough exterior and tendency to harbor pests made it a target for import restrictions. The fruit was largely unknown to most Americans, coming primarily from Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. Agricultural inspectors worried that seed borers hidden in the fruit could spread to other crops, and the lack of commercial demand made it easy to justify strict limitations. Sapodilla remained effectively banned from most American markets until recent decades, and even now it's a specialty item found mainly in Latin American grocery stores, unknown to the vast majority of Americans. Number 13. Soursop. Soursop, or guanabana, faced import bans and restrictions starting in the 1950s due to its susceptibility to fruit flies and anthracnose fungus. This large, spiky green fruit with creamy white flesh was popular in Latin America and the Caribbean. Still, agricultural officials viewed it as a high-risk import that could introduce multiple pests and diseases simultaneously. The fruit's thick, irregular skin made inspection difficult, and its tendency to ripen quickly meant that by the time it reached American ports, it was often in a condition that made pest detection nearly impossible. Fresh soursop imports were effectively blocked from most of the United States, though the fruit remained available in frozen pulp form for Latin American immigrant communities. Most Americans have never tasted fresh soursop, missing out on its unique flavor, described as a combination of strawberry, pineapple, and citrus with creamy undertones. Number 12. Guava. fresh guava imports were banned for multiple decades, starting in the 1950s, due to the guava fruit fly, a major agricultural threat that could devastate commercial fruit production across the southern United States. This pest attacks not only guavas, but also citrus, mango, papaya, and dozens of other commercially important crops. The ban was stringent for guavas from Hawaii, Mexico, Central America, and South America, where the guava fruit fly was endemic. Agricultural officials feared that even a single infested guava could establish the pest in California or Florida, leading to billions of dollars in crop losses and the need for mandatory pesticide treatments. Fresh guavas were virtually absent from mainland American markets for decades, available only to those who grew them in their own yards in frost-free regions. The fruit's incredible vitamin C content and distinctive musky sweet flavor remained unknown to most Americans until import restrictions eased in recent decades. Number 11. Fresh pineapple tops. While pineapple flesh was never banned, importing pineapples with their tops attached was restricted in the 1950s because the leafy crowns can carry mealybugs and various plant diseases. These pests could establish themselves on other plants and spread rapidly in American agriculture and ornamental plantings. The restriction meant that most imported pineapples had to have their tops removed before entering the country, eliminating the traditional method of propagating new pineapple plants by rooting the crown. Home gardeners who wanted to grow their own pineapples had to seek out domestic sources or smuggle tops from Hawaii. The ban reflected the 1950s approach to agricultural biosecurity. Eliminate even minor risks by blocking entire pathways for pest entry, even if it meant changing how products were traditionally sold and used. Number 10. Fresh citrus from the Caribbean. Fresh citrus from Caribbean islands faced severe import restrictions in the 1950s due to citrus canker outbreaks. This bacterial disease causes lesions on leaves, fruit, and stems, making fruit unmarketable and eventually killing trees. Citrus canker spreads rapidly through wind-driven rain and contaminated equipment, and there is no cure once trees are infected. Caribbean citrus, particularly from Cuba and other islands, was effectively banned from American markets to protect Florida's massive citrus industry. The restrictions lasted for decades and eliminated access to unique Caribbean citrus varieties that had developed distinct flavors in island climates. Americans lost the opportunity to taste these regional varieties, and Caribbean farmers lost a major export market. The ban reshaped Caribbean agriculture and American citrus consumption patterns for generations. Number 9. Fresh citrus from Mexico. Fresh Mexican citrus was banned for many decades, from the 1960s onward, due to a combination of citrus greening disease and fruit fly threats. Citrus greening, also called huanglongbing, is a bacterial disease spread by the Asian citrus psyllid. It causes trees to produce bitter, misshapen fruit and eventually kills them. There is no cure. The ban on Mexican citrus was one of the longest-lasting fruit import restrictions in American history, protecting California and Florida citrus industries, but eliminating access to Mexican varieties that had been traded across the border for generations. Mexican limes, oranges, and grapefruits developed unique characteristics in their home climate, but Americans couldn't taste them until the ban was partially lifted in recent years with strict inspection protocols. The restriction fundamentally changed trade relationships and meant that Americans knew only domestic citrus varieties for multiple generations. Number 8. Passionfruit. Many varieties of passionfruit faced import restrictions in the 1950s because they serve as carriers for several plant viruses, including cucumber mosaic virus and woodiness virus. These pathogens can spread to commercial crops, reducing yields and fruit quality across entire growing regions. Passionfruit from South America, Australia, and parts of Asia was particularly restricted due to endemic virus problems in those regions. The fruit's incredibly aromatic, tart-sweet flavor and distinctive appearance made it desirable, but agricultural officials prioritized disease prevention over consumer access. Fresh passionfruit remained rare in American markets for decades, available mainly as frozen pulp or juice concentrate. Most Americans never experienced the full flavor of fresh passionfruit with its crunchy seeds and intensely perfumed flesh, knowing it only as a flavor in juice blends and cocktails. Number 7. Miracle Berry. Miracle Berry wasn't banned as a fresh fruit, but the FDA blocked its commercialization as a food additive in the 1970s, following groundwork laid in the late 1950s and 1960s. This small red berry from West Africa contains miraculin, a protein that binds to taste receptors, making sour foods taste sweet for up to an hour after consumption. Researchers and entrepreneurs saw massive potential for Miracle Berry as a natural sweetener that could replace sugar without calories, but the FDA denied its approval as a food additive after intense lobbying from the sugar industry. The decision was controversial and remains disputed today, with critics arguing that economic pressure, rather than safety concerns, drove the ban. Americans were prevented from accessing a natural product that could have transformed food consumption patterns, and the Miracle Berry remained a curiosity rather than a commercial product, available only as fresh berries or tablets in a legal gray area. Number 6. Ackee Fruit. Ackee fruit has been heavily restricted in the United States since the 1950s due to the presence of hypoglycin A, a naturally occurring toxin that causes Jamaican vomiting sickness. Unripe or improperly prepared ackee can cause severe vomiting, convulsions, and even death due to hypoglycemia. The FDA bans the import of raw ackee except from approved canneries that follow strict processing protocols. The fruit is Jamaica's national dish when correctly prepared, with the cooked arils having a texture and flavor similar to scrambled eggs. But the risk of toxicity meant that fresh ackee was effectively banned from American markets, available only to those who grew it in frost-free regions of the United States or to those who purchased expensive canned versions. The ban protected Americans from a genuine health risk, but it also eliminated access to an important Caribbean staple and prevented Americans from enjoying the fruit in its traditional, freshly cooked form. Even today, bringing fresh ackee into the United States is illegal, and violations can result in confiscation and fines. Number 5. Fresh Indian mangoes. Fresh mangoes from India were banned from the 1980s until 2007 due to concerns about mango weevils and fruit flies that could devastate American agriculture. India produces hundreds of mango varieties, many considered superior to anything grown elsewhere, with complex flavors ranging from honey-sweet to spiced and aromatic. The ban lasted over 2 decades and cut off American access to legendary varieties like Alfonso, Kesar, and Langra mangoes, which were considered the finest in the world. Indian Americans and mango enthusiasts lobbied for years to overturn the ban, arguing that irradiation and other treatments could eliminate pest risks. When the ban was finally lifted in 2007, fresh Indian mangoes became available at premium prices, but an entire generation of Americans had grown up never tasting them. The restriction shaped American perceptions of what mangoes should taste like, with most people knowing only the fibrous varieties grown in Florida and Mexico. Number 4. Longan. Longan, the dragon's eye fruit, faced the same import restrictions as its close relative, Lychee, which is banned or heavily restricted from many Asian countries due to fruit fly concerns. These small brown-skinned fruits with translucent white flesh and a single dark seed were considered high-risk hosts for multiple fruit fly species that could establish themselves in American agriculture. Fresh Longan imports from Thailand, Vietnam, and China were effectively blocked throughout the 1950s and beyond, available only to those who visited Asia or lived in the few American regions where Longan trees could be grown. The fruit's delicate sweetness and floral aroma remained unknown to most Americans, who had access only to canned Longan in syrup that bore little resemblance to the fresh fruit. The ban reflected the 1950s approach of prioritizing agricultural protection over consumer choice, even when it meant eliminating access to fruits that had been enjoyed in Asia for thousands of years. Number 3. Fresh lychee. Fresh lychee from many countries faced import restrictions in the 1950s due to concerns about fruit flies and invasive pests. These rough-skinned fruits with sweet, aromatic white flesh were considered high-risk carriers of multiple pest species, particularly when imported from China, Southeast Asia, and other regions where fruit flies were endemic. The restrictions meant that most Americans never tasted fresh lychee during their peak season, when the flavor is most complex and the texture most delicate. Instead, they knew lychee only from canned versions or from expensive air-freighted fruit that arrived under strict inspection protocols. The ban eliminated access to dozens of lychee varieties that developed unique flavors in different Asian regions, homogenizing American experiences with the fruit to a few commercially approved varieties. Fresh lychee remained a luxury item rather than a common fruit, and entire generations grew up without experiencing its perfumed sweetness. Number 2. Rambutan. Rambutan, the spiky red cousin of lychee, was banned from import in the 1950s due to the same fruit fly infestation concerns that affected other Southeast Asian fruits. These striking fruits, with their hair-like spines and translucent sweet flesh, were considered particularly high risk because their irregular surfaces made inspection difficult and pest detection nearly impossible. The ban was stringent for rambutans from Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, where multiple fruit fly species are endemic. Americans missed out on a fruit that's beloved across Southeast Asia for its unique appearance and honey-sweet flavor. Rambutan didn't appear in American markets in significant quantities until the 1990s and 2000s, when improved inspection and treatment technologies enabled limited imports. Even today, fresh rambutan remains a specialty item found mainly in Asian grocery stores, unknown to the vast majority of Americans who have no idea what they're missing. Number 1. Mangosteen. Mangosteen, called the Queen of Fruits, was banned from import for decades due to fears it carried Asian fruit fly larvae. This purple fruit with snow-white segments inside and a flavor described as a combination of strawberry, peach, and vanilla was unavailable to Americans from the 1950s until 2007, when irradiation treatments finally allowed limited imports. The ban lasted over 50 years and became legendary among fruit enthusiasts who traveled to Southeast Asia specifically to taste mangosteens. The fruit's reputation grew during the ban years, with travelers returning to tell stories of its incredible flavor that couldn't be adequately described. When fresh mangosteens finally became available in American markets in 2007, they sold for premium prices and still remain expensive due to limited supply and strict import protocols. An entire generation of Americans grew up hearing about mangosteens but never tasting them. And even today, most Americans have never experienced the fruit that much of the world considers the finest of all. While many bans served legitimate purposes, protecting crops from devastating pests and diseases, they also eliminated cultural food traditions and prevented Americans from experiencing the full diversity of global fruit production. Which of these banned fruits have you tasted before? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this interesting, leave a hype and subscribe for more.